Among the slides passed to Hitchin Historical Society from the late Bill Palmer was a group entitled Edwardian Summer. The box declared "Paintings by E. A. Phipson." Fortunately, there was a set of notes describing them. E. A. Phipson was born in 1854 and died in 1931. He adopted the name Everkustes, a Greek word meaning ready listener. He was a prolific watercolour artist, specialising in views painted with almost photographic accuracy. His paintings record the old architectural features of towns and villages across the country. Many paintings were bought by local libraries and art galleries. We're seeing here a selection of his watercolours from around Britain. He was working in the Hertfordshire area at the turn of the 20th century. In 1983, Hitchin Museum held an exhibition of his local paintings. The notes credit Alan Fleck for the images. I'll quote the descriptions as we look at each painting in turn. Like Bill Palmer, I've added other pictures from both the Palmer collection and other sources, together with images taken especially for this presentation. Bridge Street takes its name from the bridge which has spanned the River His since at least 1784. It was previously known as Bull Street, and before that, as Spittle Street. The painter brings the scene to life with a little girl peering in the shop window. Customers coming out of the shop. The hanging sign is for the Plough and Dial public houses. We see the end of Sun Street and the start of Tilehouse Street. And finally, the wall of Lucas's Brewery, and a couple gossiping in the foreground. This photo from the Palmer collection is undated, but is evidently from the same period. The shop has the same frontage. Further along, we can see the two signs for the Plough and Dial pubs. The Pony and Trap is just coming out of Tilehouse Street. We can't quite read the name of the shop at the end of Sun Street. The curved wall of Lucas's Brewery adjoins the railings that mark the bridge that gives the street its name. They're not in view in the painting. Founded in 1709 by William Lucas, the brewery was on this site on the corner of Sun Street and Bridge Street until its closure in the 1920s. Here we see the staff alongside their new steam wagon in 1910. Let's have a look at the map from 1898. I put a camera symbol where I think the artist's viewpoint was. I've also coloured in the River His so you can see where it crosses the road. We can compare the 1903 scene with the view in 2018 and see that the left-hand side of the road has hardly changed, whereas the right-hand side is totally different. On the left, the timber beams of the building are now exposed. On the right, the former brewery site has been redeveloped more than once in the intervening years. The railings still mark the site of the bridge, and finally, the only remnant of Old Hitchin is the building facing the river, which is out of sight in the painting. The separate pubs became amalgamated into one called the Plough and Dial in a new building next to the river, in this undated photo. The former pub buildings at the end were demolished some time later, forming the new entrance to the priory. Let's move on now to Tilehouse Street, or Tyler's Street, to use its old name. The next painting is of the 3 Tons pub. The artist was looking back from about this point on the north side. Reginald Hine reckoned that the better-class drinker resorted to the Cooper's Arms, further up the street, and only the riffraff frequented the 3 Tons. The cottage on the near side of the arch was once part of the 3 Tons, but by 1903 it was the home to Mr. George Day, the basket maker, and his wife. Basket weaving was a craft that had flourished in Hitchin since the days when there were osier beds beside the River His, in what's now Bancroft Recreation Ground. Their 3 Tons also featured in Hitchin Cine Society's film of Tilehouse Street, made in 1950. By then it was no longer a pub, but occupied by Harding's newsagents. However, next door, the son of the previous Mr. Day was still making baskets. He preferred to work in the cool of the cellar, which helped keep the withies pliable. The buildings in Lower Tilehouse Street looked rather neglected in 1970. The 3 tons were still in commercial use. But by 2018, number 11 Tilehouse Street was a private house, and much spruced up. But there's still a plaque to remind us of the building's past. We move on now further up Tilehouse Street to Hall's Yard. Like many of the yards in Old Hitchin, the adjacent building extends over the yard entrance at first floor level. By 1950, the yard looked decidedly tired. It had been home to Hall's grocery business that, according to Reginald Hine, made the building smell of cloves, paraffin and sealing wax. But by the present day its pride had been restored. The building on the right retains its old beams, though the buildings through the yard appear to be modern. Retracing our steps a little, we move back down Tilehouse Street and into Bucklersbury to the Red Hart. Red Hart has a long history, the building dating from between 1490 and 1550. It was in use as an inn before its neighbour, the George. In 1805 it belonged to the Hitchin brewer, John Crabbe. By 1853 it was owned by Simpsons of Baldock. The buildings in Bucklersbury are virtually unchanged, as I think you can see. By 2018, however, the Red Hart had transformed into a trendy restaurant, but the yard, where coaches used to pull in, remains alongside. The Secretary of the Royal Historical Society is quoted as saying of the Red Hart, "It is not only a thing of beauty, it is a document, and it speaks more eloquently than do some parchments of the past." The George Inn is also one of the oldest buildings in Hitchin. Parts of it date back to around 1450. The long ranges of outbuildings at right angles to the street are typically medieval. The building has been an inn since at least 1676. The name George comes not from one of the Hanoverian monarchs, but from American President George Washington. The artist made the yard appear much more spacious than it really is. However, the buildings have survived in the intervening century, despite the plethora of aerials, wires and pipes adorning them. Stepping out of the George Yard, we move next to the marketplace and look back into Bucklersbury. A digression here to the painting from 1846 by Samuel Lucas of the same view. The artist has taken a bit of a licence, as the Red Lion at number 36 is actually further down Bucklersbury. As you can see in this view, it's the building with the little lion sticking out. The next painting is of a Logsdon's yard, now long gone. The notes tell us that the yard was next to the Corn Exchange, and at the turn of the 20th century, Edwin Logsdon had a confectionery business and refreshment room. Here it is marked on the map. This postcard from 1902 shows the front, and the name Logsdon can be seen above the shop with the yard entrance next to it. In 1912, the entrance to Logsdon Yard looked like this, promising the opening of the Playhouse, Cinema and Theatre to rival the Blake Brothers Picturedrome on Ickleford Road. And here it is promising perfect pictures and refined variety. The business next door was now solely a restaurant owned by Mr. Hobley. The cinema closed in the mid-30s and the yard disappeared. The premises are now entirely retail. Let's move across the marketplace to an old established Hitchin business. Phipson captioned this watercolour Marketplace, and the notes add, "Before the market moved out during the Second World War, the square was the focus for local commercial and social activity." It depicts Messrs. Gatwood's jewellery shop, which is probably the only business still trading on the same site. Remarkably little had changed by 2018, though the white rendering has brightened the whole scene. The blue plaque tells that the building was probably a former drover's inn, and that Gatwoods have been the owners since 1760. So far, we've had an easy time identifying the present-day view of Evercusties Phipson's paintings. Now we come to the part of Hitchin that has changed the most over the years, Queen Street. The street was renamed from Back Street in the 19th century in honour of Queen Victoria. It had previously been known as Dead Street because the overcrowded slum housing and poor sanitation made its inhabitants particularly prone to epidemic disease. For this reason, in the 20s and 30s, a great swathe of squalid housing, mean yards and alleyways was cleared away. The view from St Mary's Church Tower shows the area cleared. The building still standing, to the left, is the King's Head pub. And here is the view from Windmill Hill. Of course, more buildings have appeared since the clearance. The extent of the changes can be seen as we merge from the 1898 map to the present day. This transition is courtesy of the National Library of Scotland map collection. Some of the old buildings can be seen in this view of Queen Street from Hollow Lane. St Mary's Church Tower can be seen peeping above the Bushel and Strike pub. The Peahen is to the right, one of 13 along this stretch of the town. The scene in 1965 allows a clear view of St Mary's, with Mount Garrison on the right and St Andrew's Place on the left. We skip across town now and to another site that has changed beyond recognition. This is Paynes Park. This row of houses, known as Alfred Cottages, stood almost opposite Charnwood, the former museum. They were demolished to make way for West Alley car park. The cottages are marked in red, and the artist's viewpoint must have been about where I put the camera symbol. Where the cottages once stood is now just so much tarmac. The buildings you can see are at the top of West Alley. We make our way now down to Bancroft, one of Hitchin's main arteries. The buildings, numbers 102 to 105 Bancroft, are distinctive and unchanged to this day. The archway leads through to William Ransom's lavender distillery. William Ransom, 1826 to 1914, founded his pharmaceutical business here. It was unusual in that Ransoms themselves grew many of the herbs from which they distilled the extracts. The lavender was harvested in August, and Ransom's 20 acres of fields reckoned to produce 1,000 gallons of lavender water in any one year. The buildings in Bancroft are virtually unchanged. Ransom's yard entrance is marked by a blue plaque. Ransom's is still a major producer of botanical pharmaceuticals. Its large distillery is now located in Burymead Road. Leaving the town centre behind, we now move to Stevenage Road, where the building known as Sunnyside stands. The notes tell us that it was formerly a pest house for those with contagious diseases. As this map shows, it gives its name to the adjacent brickworks in the late Victorian and early Edwardian period. In the 1980s, it had been extended and became a public house called The New Found Out. But by 2018, it had returned to private ownership. As a finale, let's have a look at all 12 of Evercusties Phipson's watercolours of Hitchin at the turn of 20th century, with their modern counterparts.